So good afternoon, everyone. We're Nova Bank. I'm Vander.
Luiz.
I'm Bruno.
So I want to start with a little story to illustrate what we're doing and why we're doing. So that's a favela, what's a Brazilian a poor community. I grew up in one of those places, and since a young age, I'm very aware of the social challenge that exists for everyone. And that's how I fell in love with social development. I came to Babson, we're entrepreneurship school. And one thing that I learned is that the best tool to produce social development is through entrepreneurship. Unfortunately, there is no entrepreneurship without money. And in other words, there is no entrepreneurship without credit. So for someone who is born like this to change their lives and to use entrepreneurship as a tool for that, they need credit. The problem with that is that in Brazil, for instance, we have around 9% of the population who are actually borrowing from a financial institution. That's data from the World Bank. And when they actually are able to borrow from a financial institution to produce and to create value, they face the problem of high interest rates. That's the composition of the spread, the bank spread. We have very high administrative expense. This is like 25%, 37% of default rates, 15 of margin, and 23 of taxes. So our solution has to approach that problem and provide something that can actually create value in solving some of the issues we just established. That came from our discussion, so it's not the best design ever, but explains very well what we're trying to explain here. We have Nova Bank producing a loan to someone who can use that loan in their communities. If you move on to the next slide, I have a large description. Again, 2 hours discussion. The different stages that can happen, the whole operation can happen. The first one, the loan comes from Nova Bank to a person. This loan comes as a form of Tezos and comes to something like this, cold wallet. Person can use as a physical thing. It could have a private key on one side, a public key on the other side. They can actually carry, I don't know, their pockets or whatever they want to carry. And they, of course, can cash out at any moment using anywhere. So they have the stimulus to actually get into the network, actually use Tezos. But they also have the stimulus to stay in the network, because we can use the free float to produce yields for the people who leave the money there. So if you actually use the cold wallet, you can actually produce, use indexes of arbitrage and whatever to produce yields, so you have the stimulus to stay in the network. And finally, I also have the stimulus to use your wallet and Tezos to do whatever you want to do because of the mass adoption. Once you have more people using it, you have more stimulus to use. And since it's very simple, you can carry around, you can actually use it in your community.
Yeah, and just an add to that is that we are going to use a cold wallet with multi-sig.
Oh yeah, multi-sig.
To improve security in like poor communities and so on.
Yes. Our revenue model, of course, you're going to have something of the spread. But if you remember the first graph I showed, like around 25% comes from administrative costs. We're going to reduce that with the whole operation that we're proposing here. Most of that comes from fraud prevention, which you can actually reduce, as I said, with multi-sig. We have around 31% coming from branches and ATMs. You can reduce that as well. You can use, for instance, mail to deliver the wallet. 37%, if you remember back, it was due default rates. We can use to approach that the collective economics. People can create groups to receive the loans, so we can reduce that default rate to around 2%. Some projects in other countries implement that around 2%. In Brazil, we estimate it should be around 4%. We can also create revenue through the free float, as I mentioned before, the arbitrage of everything that we're doing. Building a stack, the diverse components of the blockchain. We can use the smart contracts actually to create algorithms that can develop the whole credit analysis. We can have the storage to create a credit score for everyone who is taking the loan from Nova Bank. We, of course, are going to have mass transactions within the communities that will build the side chains. And the open source APIs and the commercial APIs drag to answer one question. Why Tezos? What makes Tezos different and you should use it in our network? So Of course, it's an open source platform for assets and applications. You can build on the platform and actually reproduce the model in different states, in different places, in different situations. We have freedom to propose new protocols. You're going to have a large amount of data coming from the different transactions, the different audience that are going to achieve. So you can approach that as well. And you can have opportunity to create a community-based ecosystem. My time is up.
Thank you.
That's our team. Thank you so much.
You guys had a great presence, and I loved what you're pitching here. My question is the largest chunk on that first pie chart is default risk.
Yeah.
And you're talking about serving underserved communities and entrepreneurial ventures, which both only substantially compound that default risk. How is that?
Can I answer? So we have a project, we have a bank in Brazil, actually intern for that bank. It's called the Northeast Bank of Brazil, Banco do Nordeste. They have a similar, not using crypto or anything. It's a very traditional, very based on the Mohammed Yunus work in Bangladesh. They have a default rate around 4%. That comes from 2013, when Brazil was actually hit by a huge economic crisis. So on the top of the crisis, the worst moment possible for people to repay loans, they only had 4%. The best moments, they actually achieved 2%. So the default rates using the collective economics is actually a very strong tool against the default rates and actually help on that 4% or 2%.